Let's talk about how to create a successful online course. Now, I'm super passionate about this topic because in a lot of the conversation online, most people are just talking about the marketing of your online course. And don't get me wrong, that's super important. We're going to talk about that too, because if you don't have students in your program, then obviously it can't be successful. But what is really important and often missed is there's a lot of things that you can do to make it more likely that your program will actually help your students achieve the transformation that they're looking for. This involves knowing just a little bit about learning theory and what motivates people. When you take all of that and integrate it into your program, you will have a much higher chance of having a successful long-term business. Because if you don't do that, then it's pretty quick that this will all fizzle out. And if you want to build something that's truly impactful and truly lucrative, then you want to make sure that you are building something that actually has an impact. It's also how you strengthen your reputation and will have a successful business for years to come. So we're going to be going over a little bit of theory, some of the essentials, things to consider, things that you can incorporate into your program to help your students succeed at whatever it is you're teaching them. And I'm going to leave you at the very end with a curriculum checklist. But real quick, in case we haven't met before, my name is Sarah Turner, and how do we know that I'm worth listening to? First things first, I have over 11 years of experience in digital marketing. So in the first half of my career, I was helping clients with their marketing and their digital products. And in the second half of my career so far, I've created two programs. One is called Write Your Way to Freedom. I teach people how to become freelance copywriters. And Let's Build Your Online Business, where I teach people how to create their own digital products like online courses. So with my first program, I've had over 6,239 students come through that program. They have achieved tremendous success. In fact, my business was ranked number 24 in education on the Inc. 5000 list for the impact it was having. Collectively, I have generated over $61 million in revenue, first as a copywriter for my own clients and then in my own business. I've also been hired by Meta as a marketing consultant because they saw how well my programs and my work were doing. And I've also had the platforms that I've hosted my programs reach out to me to ask me how I have such high engagement in my community programs. But what's far more impressive are my student successes. That, my friend, is what I am genuinely most proud of. My students have gone from knowing absolutely nothing about digital marketing to writing for brands like Google and Fenty and Audi and Gaia Herbs and Performance Health, Cleveland Clinic, Angie's List, Curology, USA Today, Alaska Airlines, Forbes Advisor. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I also track my student wins, and so I have thousands of student success stories, many of which are shared publicly on my YouTube channel. I have also been tracking my students' wins over time. So I have seen how when they stick with my process and my program and my teachings, they have grown in their own success. So maybe from making 5 figures a month to making $20,000 a month multiple times, or giving themselves that freedom that they crave, being able to move across the world, across the country, and creating a life that really matches the season of life that they're in. For example, I have a lot of moms who come through my programs who are able to scale up and down work when they have babies, when they need to take time off, when they need to be there for their family. I mean, I could truly go on, but the main thing here is that you know that I'm tracking my students' success, because this is something that I'm going to recommend you also do. Now, there's a few important things that I want you to consider before we dive into actually building out your course. First things first, you want to make sure that you are attracting and enrolling perfect fit clients. Because when you bring somebody into your program who is not a good fit for whatever reason, it just leads to disappointment all around. It is not helpful to bring somebody in if they are not a good fit for you. It can lead to bad reviews, it can lead to frustrations and disappointment, it can lead to you even questioning your own program. So I want to say right out the gate that unless your program is low ticket, let's say less than $500, you want to consider having something in place to make sure that you are enrolling perfect fit clients, and especially if you have any community element, that you're quick to remove anyone who is disruptive, because it can affect the rest of the community. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's really difficult to promise an outcome because so much is dependent on the student. So you want to be really careful about what promises you make. Think about it. If you were to hire a personal trainer, that's something that's going to really help you get your health in check. But if you're still eating like crap and you don't actually show up to the sessions, that's not the personal trainer's fault. So another way to think about this is to look at the top universities. They don't allow everyone in, they don't graduate everyone, and they don't guarantee that you're going to walk away with the exact career that you want, because so much is dependent on the student to actually make that thing happen. But that being said, you can track data and you can be really realistic about the results that you can help people achieve. In fact, I really recommend that you track data because you'll be able to share that with potential students in hopes that they'll join your program or they'll see themselves in the testimonials that you share. But it is generally very difficult for most online courses to track anything that's truly quantifiable. So I'll give you an example. In the early days of one of my programs, Write Your Way to Freedom, I used to share a statistic that I tracked that 1 out of every 6 students quit their jobs. But what I realized is that most people didn't have the goal to quit their job. So it was actually a misleading statistic, and quite frankly, in a way that was not good for me in my program, because so many people would look at it and email me and ask me questions saying, what did those 5 people do wrong? And I would respond with, well, actually their goals weren't necessarily to quit their job. And I realized that very quickly I had created what was a confusing statistic. So while tracking data is super important because there are usually so many varieties, it's very difficult to come up with something as black and white as that statistic that's actually helpful to share across the board, which is why you will typically lean into testimonials, trends, tendencies, and things like that. But obviously, you want to have that data to back it up. And I say all of this because it's something I want you to think about as you're building your curriculum, but it's also something I've seen a lot of people get hung up on. It can be really discouraging, for example, if somebody has a bad experience in your program, but it might not be the program's fault. It might actually be that they didn't show up and do the work. In fact, if anyone ever requests a refund, which is extremely low in my programs because usually they are absolutely blown away by all that they get when they sign up, I always get really nuanced and ask them a lot of questions to try and understand where things might have not gone well. And more often than not, they just didn't do the work. So keep that in mind as you are building your course and starting to bring students through it, because it can create a lot of doubt and make you think that your program isn't as effective as it might be. Now, feedback is also fantastic because you're going to want to take the feedback that you get from people, students, people who love it, people who don't love it, and you want to take it into consideration and potentially improve your program with that feedback. Finding this balance between responsibility of the student and responsibility of the program is a really important consideration that will help make your program impactful and effective and helping people achieve the transformation they're looking for. And something I want to put kind of top of mind for you as you're moving through building your program and thinking about the longevity of your course and your business is that over time, you're gonna get student requests. And I used to, in my early days, bend over backwards to make every single student request that was made of me. But what I realized is that not all of them were good. Some of them were actually harmful to the overall community. So one tip I have for you that I've discovered over time in my own program and also in helping my students who build programs navigate this particular situation is I always have them ask, what is the actual need here? Because sometimes it's simply about setting better expectations. And I'll go ahead and give you 2 examples to kind of give this idea some legs. So one request I got was that they wanted a transcript of every single coaching call. Now, we have 2 coaching calls a week that are 2 hours long. So that's 4 hours a week. And we've been doing this for 4 years. And they wanted a transcript of every single one. Now, we started out by putting transcripts up, but what we quickly realized is that because it's a transcript of people talking, it really was hard to read and it created an insane amount of content, and a lot of work for my team. And ultimately, when we were looking on the back end, people weren't reading the transcripts. They weren't actually using that. So what we realized is really what they wanted to know were the main things that were covered, the talking points, and kind of the timestamps behind it, which is what we work to include. Fortunately, AI tools have made this extremely easy to implement. Another example comes from one of my students who I helped build her program. And she had a student reach out. It was about a more sensitive topic, and she was worried about the fact that the live coaching calls during her particular cohort were recorded. And she was worried that if she shared anything too personal, she didn't have any control over who saw it in the future, because maybe she felt comfortable sharing with the people in her cohort, but she was worried about who might see it in potential cohorts down the line. So she reached out to this course creator, my student, and asked her to make every recording private. Now, the problem with that is that she's already promised that people will have access to all previous recordings. So what does she do? Go in and change her marketing messaging? Or does she go in and make it such that every cohort can only see their own cohort, which was a tech nightmare when she looked into it? And then what she realizes, like, the need here is for the student to feel safe. So what she did was she went to her and made sure that she knew she had taken all of her desires into consideration, looked at the tech possibilities and things like that, and then just really kind of walked her through a conversation where she encouraged her to just not share anything she wouldn't feel comfortable. But also she pointed out that the value was in showing up live to these particular calls, and it was highly unlikely that somebody was going to go back through and actually watch any of the replays. And because she could look at the back end, she actually shared some data of how often people went back and watched the replays, which was very minimal, again, because the value was in showing up live. She also encouraged this particular student to show up to a few calls and see how she felt after that. That student ended up being totally fine with what she saw, and she felt really seen and understood and cared for. So it ended up actually being a really positive experience without having the course creator have to go in and change absolutely everything about their program. Now, one more overall idea to keep in mind when you're a course creator is that it is important for you to put things in place to actually encourage people to do the work. So you've sold your course, you've sold your program, they're in. And what most people are surprised to find is that their students don't even open the program. And that's a problem, because eventually time might pass, they might ask for a refund, they might blame your program, things like that, and they might not be encouraged to kind of stay the course. So when you are thinking about your curriculum, I want you to also think about how can you pull people back into the program, get them to connect to their why or the reason that they originally signed up for your program, and encourage them to keep going. Some things that really help with this include engaging course materials like quizzes. And we're going to dig into how to make your course engaging a little bit more in a second. But also overcoming the time objection. So I like to remind my students of the power of compounding actions. I actually strongly recommend that they read the book The Slight Edge, because that's one of my favorite books for understanding the power of compounding actions. So the idea of that is that it is so much more powerful for you to commit 30 minutes a day to something every day than it is for you to set aside 6 hours on a Saturday to kind of like crank through or cram something, because that one is so much more likely that you will burn out. As well as when you show up consistently to do something, you see that you actually have a lot of progress and momentum by just slowly chipping away at it. Not to mention, the material is top of mind and you're encouraged by the fact that you're chipping away at it every single day. So this is really important and often overlooked. Encourage your students to overcome their own time objection. You can also, as I mentioned before, help them reconnect with their why. Another thing I like to implement are something like weekly digests, a weekly email that goes out to your community that kind of draws them back into the program. You can highlight a lesson, you can highlight a live Q&A, you can highlight anything that you think would be exciting for them and encourage them to kind of dive back into the material. A lot of course platforms allow for you to send a weekly email that kind of recaps the activity in the community element if you have one. Another thing that gets people really fired up and helps them take action are challenges. So I will often take a section of the program, maybe it's a lesson, maybe it's an entire module, and I will have people go through that together and arrange it so maybe for the month of July, we're chipping away at whatever it is. Sometimes I'll create materials specifically for that challenge, but more often than not, you can simply get people excited and inspired to do the work by having them do it with a group of people. It creates inspiration, accountability, and just general excitement to actually achieve whatever it is that particular challenge is about. An example of challenges I've done in the past are client acquisition challenges. So we'll go through a particular client acquisition strategy. We'll have everybody do one thing a day. They'll check in by responding to a post that I make into the community. And then the end goal is that they have at least one new client by the end of that month. And it works like a charm. People are so excited and so inspired, and they see everybody else doing the same thing, and it gets them to stay on track and have those wins that you really want for your students. Another thing that helps are live elements like live Q&As or coaching calls. Now, I want to say you don't have to have any of those things. If you're looking for a more passive option, you can absolutely just have an online course. Although I will say that I have found that live elements can often have a relatively low output for a massively disproportionate positive experience for your student. One example of this would be live Q&As. To show up live once a week and to answer your students' questions doesn't take a lot of time. For example, I don't have to prepare anything because they're providing me with the questions and then I am just providing the answers. I do it once a week, and the other thing that's really amazing about including something like that is it increases the value of my program, so I'm able to charge more, but also it gives me insights into where people are struggling. So if I'm getting asked the same question over and over and over again, I will create a lesson to meet my students' needs. And finally, one of my favorite things to include in your program is a community. People are often resistant to communities because they're nervous. They're nervous about how much time it will take, if they have to answer every question, and things like that. But really, truly, you can set the tone for a community, at least in my experience, and I have some ideas on how to do that. I can dig into that in a community video separately. But you can set a tone, an expectation, create a vibe in your community, and it can largely self-regulate. And I cannot tell you, even with my program, Write Your Way to Freedom, being $6,800, most of the testimonials I get from people are students saying that the community is worth the price of the course alone. Now, would they be able to achieve their goals without the course? Absolutely not. The program is the path, but the community is what feels good. It is so much more fun to connect with other people who are trying to achieve the same thing as you. It will help you when you're discouraged not feel alone, and it will help you be inspired and excited. And it's also a great place for your students to share their wins with people who truly get it. I have found that a lot of people in their personal lives, in their real life, often don't have that kind of support. And usually it's because the people in their lives just don't really get it. So I don't think it comes from a really negative place necessarily, but it's so important and helpful in maintaining momentum when you have other people who are celebrating with you the accomplishments that you have made through the course. And then on top of that, when you see other people celebrating their wins, you get inspired and you get excited. You get to see what other people are doing, learn that it's possible, and get really excited about taking that next step. So it really is just kind of this really wonderful positive feedback loop. I love communities. And quite frankly, I've met some dear friends through my communities. Because as I mentioned before, if you are attracting perfect fit clients through good marketing, you are going to bring in people that you likely want to hang out with in real life, which is really cool too. Another thing you can do is giveaways, where you actually have prizes for the things that you do in the community, like challenges, for example. Now, I want you to remember, you don't have to start with all of these. That's not the point of bringing these up, but it is something that I really want you to have top of mind, because it is just as important as having an impactful program that you are actively thinking about how you can draw your students back in to actually do the damn thing. All right, now let's build your successful curriculum. I'm gonna walk you through this. First, understanding some basic learning theory is really gonna help you out here. So this concept is by Lev Vygotsky, and it's about the zones of proximal development. So this is how you get your students to reach beyond their current abilities so that they can grow and get to a new place and experience that transformation with your help. But you want to do it so that it feels challenging and it feels good and it feels like they're making progress, but it is designed so that it is not overwhelming and your students feel hopeless and then ultimately give up. One thing that I will say I do for my programs is I always remind people that learning something new can very easily result in overwhelm. And that is a normal thing. But the best thing they can do is to just chip away. So there are 6 principles that help students be successful. The first one is knowing the why and how each activity and lesson and how it benefits them. The second is drawing on personal experience and applying it to what they learn in your program. The third is feeling responsible for their own learning. The fourth is engaging in practical and relevant learning. The fifth is focusing on solving the problem they're experiencing right now. And the sixth is prioritizing their inner desires and passions. So let's take each of these principles and apply it to your actual program. So the first one is your students need to know why they are asked to do something and how it will help them solve their problem. So how should that translate into how you build out your program? First, share learning objections. Tell students why it's worth their time and energy and how it will benefit them. Ensure that each activity has an aligned purpose and share what that purpose is with the students. They will be so much more likely to actually continue on in your program if you do this. Next, your students bring a lot of experience to your program, so consider how your program builds on what they already know. One way you could do this is you might create a pre-program survey to capture the learner experience to understand where they're coming from and how you can infuse it into your lessons. This might be something you do later on to make things better. You also can ask students to use their own examples or even prompt them to come up with their own examples to apply it to their real life. You can also get them to bring their experiences into group coaching calls if those are part of your programs. When you encourage your students to engage, you will be blown away at how much richer they make your program. So the next principle is how your student needs to feel responsible for their own learning. People like to feel in control of their progress and like they have choices. So I would recommend designing flexible activities that can adapt to your learners' needs, having a few different options for our different types of learners, which we'll dig into a little bit more in a second. You also can ask them to use their own examples for activities. And also you can give them a choice. So maybe there is a quiz or a self-assessment, and you kind of let them know that they should do whichever one feels best for them. The next principle is that your students are here because they're ready to solve a problem. So your program is most valuable when it solves an immediate real-life problem. That does not mean that it has to deliver immediate results. So some ideas are ask students to create their own goals for their learning at the start of your program. All of my programs always start with getting students to come up with very concrete goals that apply to their life and their dreams for their life. And then I give them tools and things to think through so that they walk away knowing exactly what it is they're going to achieve in my program and how they know they've reached that first level of success. It's so easy to keep focusing on what you want for your future that you forget to pause and look back and realize how far you've come. And so I'd like to integrate checkpoints as well as getting them to define their goals clearly first and telling them exactly what I'm telling you so that they know when they've achieved their first goals and they can look back and think, oh my gosh, I've come so far. It's just too easy to skip over that. And so you want to make sure that you're drawing attention to that in your students' lives. Also, making sure you're sharing real life examples, that's always really helpful with this. And if you show people a clear pathway to the transformation and where they are on that pathway, or the hero's journey, as I like to outline it for them, they're so much more likely to keep going because they know where they are and they know where they need to go. This is also where sharing student success stories is really helpful because oftentimes students will see pieces of themselves or their own story in a particular student's story, right? So maybe they don't resonate with you and your story as much, but they'll hear a student success story or an interview and they'll think, oh my gosh. And I like to get my students to share how they took the process and made it their own because that is inevitable. So for example, did they discover a new way to do client acquisition that really worked for them? What did it look like? Getting people to share that helps so much. The next principle is that your students are problem-oriented and come to their learning through the lens of solving a problem. So emphasize how your lessons are going to help them solve their problems. It's very important. Encourage students to bring their problems to coaching calls and live Q&As if that's part of your program, and ask students to reflect on what would be different in their lives when they finish the program and get them to reconnect to that why. And finally, remembering that your students are intrinsically motivated. So how does your program tap into those inner desires and passions? Clearly connect your content to their lived experience. The primary way that I do this is by getting people to share Wednesday wins every week, as well as do their own goal setting in the beginning that really connects to their why, and then having prompts throughout the program and in coaching calls and in posts in the communities where I get people to reconnect with that why. Okay, so now we're gonna build your curriculum. So step one is that you need to identify very clearly who your ICA or your ideal customer avatar is. Who is your student? What are they like? Now, this is actually an entire lesson on its own. So we're just gonna briefly touch on it. Step two is knowing the transformation of your program very clearly. Again, this is another entire lesson on its own, but I just want to be perfectly clear that you need your ICA and your transformation before you actually outline your curriculum. So step three, I want you to come up with the big picture steps. These will be your modules. So take a second and really think about this. What are the big picture steps they must accomplish in order to achieve the transformation? Real quick, I'm going to use the example of Let's Build Your Online Business, which is my program that teach people how to build digital products like online courses so that they are successful, scalable, thriving, and have a lot of impact on the students' lives and on the course creator's life. So the first modules tackle mindset because it is so important that people get clear on limiting beliefs and things that they need to integrate into their life to be a successful online course creator. This is also where I have people create their own specific goals so that they are taking this entire process and making it perfectly fit their own lives, right? Because there's a lot of things that you can do differently according to how you want your life to look. And that is truly the point of everything that I create, is helping people create lives that are what they want, because I really believe that you get to decide what success looks like. Then my next module is called Embracing Your Edge. It's about figuring out what you uniquely bring. This is also getting them ready to position their offer differently from everything else that's out there. The next module is getting clear on their customer avatar, as we mentioned, getting clear on their transformation, and getting clear on the stories so that they can start to think about what makes their program unique. The next module is outlining the actual structure of the offer so that it meets their own financial and time goals, right? Some people are going to want to create something that's a little more passive. Some people are going to want to be more heavily involved. And that's really important to balance with your own personal time and financial goals. Then the next module is actually crafting the offer. So getting them to do market research, figuring out how to price their program, and figuring out how to position their program. And then actually launching a beta test so that they can start to collect testimonials, start to make some money, and start to have some of those first student wins and integrate that feedback into their program to make it more impactful. Next module is about thinking about growing your audience. So we talk about all the different top of funnel strategies and help you figure out which one might be the best fit for you, because you don't have to do everything. In fact, you shouldn't. And so I help people figure out, based on their own goals and their own ways of kind of just experiencing the world and their own preferences, what the best strategies are for them. Also included in that are the actual lessons on certain top of funnel strategies, including Facebook ads, YouTube organic, and things like that, and an email list. The next module is on defining a curriculum, on actually making something that is impactful so that their students will achieve success and they will then go on to grow their reputation and actually build a program that delivers on its promise, which is much needed in today's world. And then the next module is on marketing, building that funnel, automating as much as possible, building the marketing systems so that you can start to actually earn money in your sleep. And then there's a module on legal resources so that they can have everything they need to make sure that their business is legally sound. So these are the modules. These are the big picture ideas that actually take people through the process of building an online program, like an online course, from scratch. Okay, so under each module, you want to start to list out every single lesson that helps them accomplish the overarching principle or idea of that module. So list out your lessons. Now, with every lesson, there should be the topic and then the goal or the objective, right? What are they going to accomplish at the end of that lesson? Now, you want to make sure that the objective is clear, specific, and measurable, because they need to know that they have succeeded in accomplishing whatever that lesson set out to do. Now, you actually might want to pause and write some of the ideas you're getting down. One quick tip. I strongly recommend to people that they pick a price of their program first and then they build to that price point. And you actually want to build just beyond it so that you're over delivering, but you don't want to build too far beyond it because you need to protect your time and energy. And the reason I recommend that is because without that, you will likely create a runaway program, meaning it is too bulky, it is too big to build, And also, you really run the risk of overwhelming your students. Instead, you want to create something that's closer to a minimum viable product, like an MVP, to kind of test the idea. And as you actually have people go through it, then you start to grow out your resources and build out different elements of the program. So right now, taking everything that you've listed so far, all your modules, all the lessons, and all the objectives, go through and ask yourself, can any of this be put on pause? Or is any of this a nice to have? So that you are actually paring down to the most essential modules and lessons that somebody needs in order to accomplish whatever your transformation is. Okay, now that you have your outline, you want to keep different learning styles in mind. We have visual learners. Visual learners love charts, pictures, graphic organizers, videos, demonstrations, memes, and GIFs. You have your auditory learners who love group discussions, podcasts, audio from a video instruction, verbal directions. Then you have people who love to read and write. So they like guided notes, downloadable transcripts, supplemental articles, and reading. They also like downloadable and printable slides. Then you've got your kinesthetic learners. They like hands-on learning, role play, skill practice, and any task that asks them to put their learning into action. Now, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to actually integrate some of these elements into every single lesson. So for example, you'll likely have a video lesson that includes slides and a transcript or an outline so that people can follow along or read if they prefer that. I also encourage my students to listen to things like a podcast, and for the people that that works for and resonates with, then they will tend to do that. And also sometimes people don't even think, oh, I can listen to this like a podcast. So even just the idea helps tap into people who might be a more auditory learner. Also, for the most part, all of my lessons include a workbook, which gives basic context to a concept and then thought-provoking questions to kind of walk them through whatever they need to come out with the deliverable or the actual objective on the end. And now, and I'm very excited about this, Let's Build Your Online Business also has an AI tool that really helps all sorts of learners because it's a really engaging element that actually meets the student where they're at. So start to think about what interactive elements you'll have for each of these lessons. And these might come to you as you actually start building out. But know that you really do need them across the board. For the most part, we learn by doing, not just by reading or listening. So also, I really encourage you to encourage your students to actually take action. Any of my students will tell you that I am just constantly harping on this, probably to an annoying degree, but it's because they will learn the most by actually taking action. So as you're going through your outline, consider including things like worksheets, downloadable transcripts, overview and notes, an AI chatbot, videos, visual aids, examples, stories, feedback, quizzes, debriefs, frameworks, graphic organizers, guided notes, demonstrations, charts, and graphs. And finally, step 6, incorporate reflection and self-assessment. It is so important to keep learners motivated by having them self-assess and learning to self-assess. And this is something I like to call out to my students because a lot of us went through the traditional school system, and so people often need a little encouragement to get comfortable doing self-assessment. This is because we usually look to an authority figure like a teacher or a professor to look over our work and give us an A+. But that's not really how most of the world works. Once you're out of school, you need to be able to self-assess. So ask yourself, where can you put checkpoints throughout your program where you encourage your students to kind of take a moment and reflect on how far they've come, how well they're doing, and if they're actually succeeding. And it even helps if you can say, how will they know that they've succeeded at the end of each lesson, and get them to think through that, because again, it's so motivating. All right, I've left you with a lot to think about and to actually do. Remember, you're gonna learn so much more if you actually take action. I am willing to bet that once you start taking action, the ideas will flow. And don't forget, in the description, I left for you a checklist which you can download and make sure that you have all the elements in place so that you have a truly effective curriculum outlined. Thanks for being here. If you have any questions in the comments, please hit me up. I love to hear them. It also gives me ideas for future videos. And of course, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. This is how I know that you want to see more things like this. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, guys.